Hi, it's Dennis Daly. I'm not sure what it would feel like to drive around the country and see your name on buildings, but that's what happens to Bill Marriott. Marriott of the Marriott dynasty of food, hotels, and hospitality. When we sat down to talk, he in Washington and I in Los Angeles, he insisted I call him Bill.
Bill, let me start out with some basic questions. I don't think there's anybody in the country who hasn't heard the word Marriott connected with accommodations. Your book certainly deals with your attitude about management and dealing with employees in that arena. Can we first go back, though? Do you have a minute to talk about the history of how the Marriott family got into serving people? When did this all start?
Oh, sure. My father and mother left Utah in 1927 and drove a Model T Ford to Washington, D.C. and opened up a 9-stool root beer stand. They had a franchise for A&W root beer, and when they got to Washington, they opened their little stand, and they sold a lot of root beer in hot, muggy Washington in July and August and September.
I can bet.
And September, and then all of a sudden October and November came along, and it got cold, and people stopped drinking ice-cold root beer, so they put in chili and hot tamales and called their place a hot shop.
Now, when did you say this all started?
1927.
1927. I remember visiting Washington, D.C. in the 50s and 60s. I had aunts and uncles, actually 3 pair out there. They all lived in the northern suburbs. They would always take us to a hot shop cafeteria. My uncle Leo, he's still alive, would love to meet you. A half of his life was centered around going to the hot shop.
Well, we got an awful lot of loyal Washington customers who've been eating in the hot shops most of their lives, and a lot of them dated their wives at the hot shops and went the old curb service. We had the first drive-in restaurants east of the Mississippi River. And,
Hot Shop Junior?
Well, that was the original
else?
Hot Shops. And Hot Shop Junior was our first attempt at fast food, and we eventually converted them into Roy Rogers.
Mm-hmm. You know, the whole... I use the word arena again here. The whole bailiwick of fast food, for you, must be fun but complicated because of all the buyouts. I mean, I'm not in the business world. I can't keep track of them, but I know our Carl's Jr.'s out here on the West Coast have now purchased Hardee's out there. Is that what's happening?
Well, I guess so. We're out of the fast food business now. We're in the lodging business and the senior living service business and in the food and supply distribution business.
But you can't tell them.
We really narrowed our focus the last few years.
You can't tell them without a scorecard anymore.
That's right. It's awful hard to know. Same with lodging. There's a big consolidation going on in the hotel business, as you know. Starwood Lodging has bought Westin and also bought ITT, so they have the Sheraton brand, the Four Points brand, the Westin brand, and a bunch of other brands, including a couple of Marriotts to run. So it's very confusing.
Bill, you talk about narrowing your focus. Let's talk about that. From a management standpoint, what happens when you try to do too many things at once?
Well, generally you don't focus on them, and you don't get a good execution. You don't learn enough about the businesses that you're in, and when you don't know your business very well, you're more prone to make mistakes. And today we're seeing a tremendous amount of focus. Everybody is getting rid of businesses that they don't understand or that they don't belong in and that they haven't had experience in or that they're not successful in, and they're getting back to their core basic business. And that's what we're done. We've just spun off our Marriott Management Services, which sells food to school kids and hospitals and schools and colleges and business and industry, and we have over 4,000 accounts in this business around the country, and we've just spun that off into a new company which will be merged with a competitor from France. And so we're really putting a business that really is food business that we know well, but a business that we thought probably could grow better in a combination with another company than it could under our own roof. And we're really going to focus on lodging and our senior living service business.
Isn't it kind of tough for a CEO such as yourself, who prides yourself in being out there among your employees and visiting your facilities, to really try to be, if not one of them, to understand the needs of the people at the bottom rung, if you are indeed trying to do too many things? I mean, I look at Herb Kelleher at Southwest Airlines, who goes out and loads baggage sometimes. I mean, you show up at your hotels at the wee small hours of the morning. You spend a lot of time with your employees. I would think that would be a much more difficult task. if indeed you were this big conglomerate or as large as you were at one time?
Well, when you get to be a big conglomerate, you become almost like a holding company. You're managing a portfolio of assets, and you're not really involved very much with your employees, and you're not too much involved with your customers. And we had a big sales, national sales day a few weeks ago, and I spent all afternoon on the phone calling customers with our salespeople. And that's more fun than anything I've done in a long time.
Let me ask you something that may seem anti-management, and I need to tell you a little bit about me. I always tell people I'm not pro-union, I'm just anti-management. But I've never had to pay a light bill, and I've never had to meet a payroll, so I've never worn your shoes. But is there a temptation among some people to see a person such as yourself, when you get out and around the employees, to look at that as being somewhat less than genuine and more like PR, or do your people know you?
Well, I think it's genuine because I do it all the time.
Okay.
In other words, I've been doing this for 43 years, and I spend about a third of my time out in the operations. This coming Saturday, I'll be in Denver, and I'll visit 7 hotels, and I'll probably shake hands with 500 people and have my picture taken with 300 or 400, and I do this all the time, and so it's not a hollow PR gesture. It's a gesture of, I hope, of caring, and at least though I feel it is, and understanding and wanting to let the people know that this is not a faceless corporation.
Well, I wanted to hear you say that. I mean, I wanted to feel, because you and I are talking from long distance. I don't have eye contact with you. I mean, I like to think, and it comes out in the book, that your employees know that you're visiting them not just to hype morale, but that you're interested in them personally.
Well, that's what I try and do, and we have an awful lot of people out there doing the same thing. We encourage our hotel general managers, as you probably read in the book, to be out with the people and out listening to what the people have to say and knowing their people. My best general managers of our hotels are the ones who know their people the best. They know something about their families. They know something about their trials and tribulations. They try and help them over the tough hurdles that they have to get over to provide better for their family. They try and provide opportunities for them to get ahead. They try and give them better training, teach them to speak English if they don't speak English. And they just do an awful lot of things to celebrate their success, to make them feel better about their work, and to help them become better citizens.
But why is it that there are so many companies smaller than yours where there is no internal communication? I'm not going to mention names, but I worked at one of the other radio networks at one time. And it was a golden opportunity for everyone within the company working on a common floor in a big building to know everybody. But coming down from management was this feeling that there was almost a caste system, that the engineers did not go bowling with the announcers, that the announcers didn't know the bookkeeping people. And I thought that was stupidity.
Well, it is, because you really need a team. And things really get done by teams. Individuals can do so much, but you can't get it done unless you've got teamwork. And the way to have a team is to know one another, be able to communicate with one another, have your people tell you that you're kind of dumb, be willing to listen to what they have to say, and be willing to accept some of their ideas and be encouraging of their ideas and provide them with an opportunity to participate in the decisions that affect them.
By the way, one day at this company, and I'm going to kind of give away what it was, I'm riding in an elevator, and there's a gentleman there, and he said, "You look kind of depressed. What's wrong?" Well, I just, not thinking he was from the company, kind of gave him the 30-second scenario as to what I thought was wrong with it. And he said, "Do you know who I am?" I said, "No." He said, "I'm Rich DeVos of Amway.
Yeah.
I own that company." And I wasn't fired.
Well, he's a good man, and that's why he's been successful, is because he's willing to notice how you feel and to ask you how you feel, and then to let you know that he was concerned.
Bill, one of the things you talk about in the book, and I want you to speak at length to this, however long you want to go, is what goes on behind the scenes at a hotel. You call it a little city that no one sees.
Well, there's an awful lot of work that goes on behind the house that people don't really think of. We call it the heart of the house because without the heart, the body can't function. And it starts at the back dock where we receive all the groceries that come in every day, the supplies that come in every day, and where our people come to work. And, you know, what goes on in a restaurant, we start preparing for the meals for the day at 4 o'clock in the morning, and people are in there working in the kitchens, developing the soups and sauces and gravies and cooking up the things that have to be served to the guests. The housekeeping employees arrive at somewhere between 7:30 and 8 o'clock. They're handed a list of rooms to make up. The laundry workers arrive about the same time. They go into the laundry and process all the dirty linen from the day before and work right on through the day. And you've got an engineering department that's down there functioning, getting around, fixing a list of things that were maybe turned in overnight that have to be fixed in the rooms as well as on the grounds and in the public areas. You've got banquet departments setting up banquet rooms. You've got men and women coming in to serve banquets. They're making the tables and setting up the functions. You've got a buffet breakfast being set up in the restaurants. You've got people managing the room service phones and delivering room service orders. We've got hotels as large as 2,000 rooms, and the back of the house is a virtual beehive of activity, and a lot of our customers never see many of these people.
One of the other things that you talk about a lot in your book, of course, is teamwork. Your Courtyard by Marriott, and there was one block from my old apartment in Washington, D.C. I used to go over there and eat every so often. I'm wondering what pains you took to make sure when that concept was started that you knew what the competition was doing. I get the impression that you really fanned out and said, hey, let's take a look at what's being done right and what's being done wrong.
Well, we looked at all our competitors, and what we basically found out was, and after talking to our customers, that people really wanted an outstanding room, and they wanted it for a lower price. And if you didn't build too big a hotel, you could build a hotel that satisfied the customers without putting in a lot of banquet rooms and meeting rooms, and give them a really good room, give them a fair price. You don't have to get into a lot of elaborate restaurants and fancy food service. Just give them a good, fair price on a good room, and we now have over 300 Courtyard hotels. And we sort of pioneered that concept. We took the best from our competitors, we sifted it and analyzed it and asked our customers what they really wanted. And when we got that answer, we went out and developed a real nice suburban small hotel that has been very, very successful.
The whole extra space hotels have for meetings and conventions, I'm sure that's a profitable thing. But when you're starting from square one, I can see that that's a big investment in floor space.
Well, it's a big investment. It depends on the size of the hotel. As I said earlier, we operate over 200, a lot of hotels with over 2,000 rooms, and there's 1,500 rooms or 1,200 rooms, and they must have the big convention space. And they're profitable in their own right, and, of course, much more complex and difficult to run than a 150-room motor hotel or a hotel that has limited service.
You talk about the fine art of listening. We've touched on this before, that you actually listen to what your employees are doing. Isn't there a temptation, and here again I sound anti-management, forgive me, that when you rise to a certain level, you tend to think you know everything? I mean, is that one of the reasons why there is so much unreceptivity at the top level in a lot of companies?
Well, I think senior managers get caught up in doing the things that senior managers think they're supposed to do. They're studying the policies of the company, the strategies of the company. They're mixing around with other senior managers of other companies to learn best practices in these other companies. And they don't get out with the people as often as I think many of us would like to. I don't get out as often as I'd like to, but I make a firm vow every year that I'm going to get out at least 50 to 75 days a year in the operations, and I do it. I'll visit over 200 hotels this year. And
do they all know you're coming?
Well, sometimes they do and sometimes they don't. When it's out of Washington, they usually do, because I need a room and I have to call them and tell them I'm coming so I can get a place to sleep.
Do they ever tell you they're full?
No, they don't. As a matter of fact, they seem to be able to find a room. Of course, I give them enough, usually try and give them some notice so they don't have to displace somebody, but for some reason or other, they usually find me a room.
What is it like when a beginning employee realizes they're talking to the man whose name is on the outside of the building?
Well, sometimes they're quite shocked, and in fact, I had a very interesting experience in China. We have several hotels now in China, and I was in our hotel in Beijing, and I was walking through the kitchen, shaking hands with the chefs and the cooks, and I noticed a little lady over in the corner who was mopping the floor, and she wouldn't look at me, of course, and so I walked over and I put my arm around her and I shook her hand, and she turned and looked up at me, and somebody took our picture together. And I just knew, just sort of by who she was and the way she was acting, that she had probably never met a management person in her life.
Mm-hmm.
And so I thought this was special for me to be able to give her a little bit of a show of affection and a show of interest for what she was doing, a little lady that nobody really was paying a whole lot of attention to.
Did you ever meet Colonel Sanders?
Oh, yeah.
I hope the story's true. Have you heard the one about him going to one of his restaurants and the food wasn't up to par? I've heard this in several ways, but he apparently never flew, and he would drive a lot and not always wear his white outfit. And he went into some Kentucky Fried Chicken somewhere, and it just wasn't right. So he went out to his car, got his suitcase, went around to the restroom, put the white suit on, came in the front door and said, "Boys and girls, I'm going to show you how to make chicken." And I can just imagine some 17-year-old kid behind the counter thinking, oh,
Yeah,
I mean, that would be, but he was a wonderful man.
Yeah, he was. He was very enthusiastic about his product, and he was the image of his product. And Dave Thomas has done a lot of the same thing in Wendy's.
Well, I have always thought that what you're doing as a second generation with the last name, and I mentioned Herb Kelleher at Southwest and Colonel Sanders, and you mentioned Dave Thomas, that you can't, or Frank Perdue with Perdue Chicken.
Right.
That even though some people who are the spokesperson for their company are kind of a court jester, others really have a wonderful image that they portray, and I don't think there's any better kind of advertising than to see the guy who's doing it.
Well, I think that's true, and I try to get to a lot of customer functions every year as well, and let our customers know that how important they are to us, and shake their hands. And this new book I've written, I was at a customer function 3 weeks ago and signed over 200 books for our customers at that function, and that was great fun for me. I hope they enjoyed it and appreciated the book, but it gave us something to talk about and something to, to just share together, that I was able to sign a book and give it to them.
I feel guilty. I'm going to mention the name of the book, The Spirit to Serve, Marriott's Way. You're one of the few people I've interviewed who does not mention the name of the book every time they answer a question. Don't you love it? They'll always say, well, in my new book, and then they'll mention the name of it. One of the things you talk about also is the necessity for supervisors, people under you, to know that if they have bad news, if they are going to raise a red flag here, that they should not be afraid, because you're not going to kill the messenger. You need to know what's wrong.
You can't fix it if you don't know what's wrong. And if your people stop talking to you and bringing you bad news, then you really are in deep trouble, because all of a sudden it's going to be like a tidal wave. It'll hit you and you'll be out of business. And you just can't afford to let that happen. You've got to keep those channels of communications open. Your people have got to realize that they can come to you with what's going on in the world, and they've got to be able to tell you just like it is. And then you can get out and fix it. You got to get that problem out on the table and dissect it and work it and figure out a way to solve it and resolve it and get on to something else.
Hey, who's this handsome guy in the Navy uniform here in your book?
That was my high school graduation picture, I think. That was back a long time ago.
That's a great photo, though.
Thank you.
Say, I read in here about Marriott getting into the airline food service business, and you mentioned Hoover Field. This will only be of interest to people around Washington, D.C. Where was that?
That's where the Pentagon is now.
Oh, really?
Sure, and a great story about that field was I heard Eddie Rickenbacker talking one time, and he said that he was flying a Eastern Airlines DC-3 out of that field, and they had a road that went right across the runway, and it was a normal road. Trucks and everything went across that road, and they had a red light so that when an airplane was taken off, the light would go on and the traffic would stop. And he was coming down the runway full bore, and all of a sudden he looked up, and there was a truck right in the middle of the runway. The light hadn't worked, and he said he pulled back on the stick, went over top of the truck, came down on the other side, and kept on going.
Well,
that was Hoover Field.
Rickenbacker is famous, I think, from taking off in a DC-3 in Burma with about 70 people on the plane evacuating. It was twice the load limit. He managed to get it off the ground.
He was amazing.
What would you say to a young person getting into business? And I'm going to load this question. So many young people, for my tastes, are a little bit me-oriented, a little bit I, myself. as far as really understanding that a company does not work solely on the strength of the CEO?
It works on the strength of the people. The CEO, all he can do is provide inspiration and some direction and creativity and a little bit of leadership and encourage the people to get out and serve the customer. I don't care what business you're in, you've got customers to take care of. Even if you're on the assembly line in a plant, you've got to put your very heart and soul into that end product so that your customers will buy more of them, tell their friends it's a good product, and come back. And it's how the people feel about their work. It's how they feel about their job. It's how they feel about the boss that makes all the difference in the world in company performance.
I want to again talk about something about Washington, D.C. before we move on. Back in the 50s, you built what was a really pioneering hotel complex, which is not there anymore. It's on the Virginia side of the 14th Street Bridge called Twin Bridges. And I think it'll surprise a lot of people if they look over to the right, if they haven't been in Washington, that that's an empty lot now. That really set the standard in a way, didn't it? I mean, weren't there a lot of really new things you did when that first went up?
That was our very first hotel. And my father was the one who developed that hotel with his management team, and he had a lot of different things he did. One of the things that he did was to put in a drive-in registration. So when you drove your car in to the hotel parking lot, you drove up to the registration booth just like you drive up to a fast food window today, and you stuck your head out of the car window, and the room clerk stuck their head out of the window, and you negotiated the room rate, and they booked your room, and a boy on a bicycle took you to your guest room. And so we had bellmen on bicycles and people in their cars. They never had to get out of their car till they got the room. They got out of their car, they walked right straight into the room because all rooms, for the most part, were accessible from the street. And it was a lot of interesting and new things that my dad put in that hotel. Of course, it had a big swimming pool, which all the hotels have today. But in the winter, we put an ice rink over top the swimming pool and ran an ice skating rink so our people would have something to do when they came for winter weekends.
And it had such a wonderful proximity to National Airport.
It did, and it was sure noisy because those planes went right over the top of that hotel. We did everything we could to soundproof that hotel, but still you could hear them.
There's a hotel right off the end of the, well, this happens at a lot of places, up in Burbank. It's one of those, it begins with the letter H. I won't tell what name it is.
There's a lot of H's out there.
Well, see. They must use 4 panes of glass or something. I don't know how they do it, but they actually keep the airplane noise out of the hotel. What is the big push now? Is it going back to the courtyard concept of, I mean, the boutique hotel, the smaller places?
Well, it is
Is there
right
a
now.
trend?
It is right now because there is no financing available for building a new big hotel. Plus, when you assemble the land in a major city like New York or San Francisco or Boston and try and build a new hotel, the costs are just out of sight. So you just can't economically afford to build the big hotels. What we're doing in our company is trying to become a global hotel company. And we're now in 52 countries and hope to be in 70 countries in the next 2 or 3 years. And we were only in about 4 countries 10 years ago. So we have really grown around the world, and we find that more and more people are traveling today who never traveled before, and I'm talking about people like China. This year, China will have at least 5 to 5.5 million Chinese leave China for trips abroad. And 20 years ago, as you know, nobody left China to go anywhere. Mm-hmm. So, and you're seeing the same thing with Russia. You're seeing the same thing with India. You're seeing a lot of people now begin to travel who have the means to travel who never before left their home country.
And it is amazing, and you certainly know this more than I because I haven't traveled overseas but twice now, how Americanized the rest of the world is. I was in a restaurant on the island of Malta 2 summers ago, and I walked in, and they're not only watching an Atlanta Braves baseball game, 2 Maltese men are arguing about one of the pitcher's records. And I was... They did make one mistake, though. They had some American burgers. They had a California burger, which had avocado and a lot of other things. Then they had an Indiana burger. And I'm from Indiana, and I'm thinking, what does it have, Valvoline on it or little checkered flags? Cajun. They had
Cajun Indiana burger.
They had mixed up Louisiana with Indiana, but they got close. What about your upbringing? I can't help but think that your roots, your religious background in ethics have a lot to do with your attitude about things.
Well, I was raised as a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, the Mormons, and my parents were very strong in the church, and ours is a lay church. In other words, everybody works in the church. We don't have any paid ministry. And so I've been in active church positions and jobs now for over 40 years, and it has added a lot to my life. And I think one of the primary teachings of our church is that we believe in Jesus Christ, and we believe that Jesus Christ really reached out to people, loved people, gave his life for the world, and because he loved the people and he was kind to everyone and helped people, this is the kind of thing we have to do in our business. And I try and be a good Christian, and I try and be a good member of our church, and I try and let our people know that we really do care about them, that we really are interested in their welfare and their well-being. And when anybody gets sick in our company that we know about, he or she gets an awful lot of attention and a lot of care on the part of the employees and associates in our company who are out there to help people. And I think if people know that they have a boss who cares and a group of associates who care about them, and we can put this caring forward in our business, that it is very, very effective in really achieving the spirit to serve, which, of course, is the name of the book.
You must be pretty selective then in hiring mid-level managers. I mean, you'd have to.
Well, we are. We screen very carefully for people who know how to get along with people, people who like to work with people, people who like to serve other people, people who will listen, people who enjoy working with people. It's very important for us.
What about the involvement in the community? I know in a big city it's still possible. There are clubs and groups out there, but particularly some of your facilities, which are in some of the smaller towns in the U.S., the tie-in between what a hotel, a name such as that can do to fundraising, providing things, being a part of the social service within a community.
Well, I got a wonderful letter the other day from a chief of police in a smaller city, and one of his officers had been gunned down in a gun battle, and the manager of our little hotel there just took the whole family in. Got his wife, helped provide food for the home. When people came to the funeral, provided housing and accommodations for the family and for the friends and for the police officers who came to the funeral from all around the state. And this police captain was so impressed that he wrote me the nicest letter just commending our guy who went out of his way to take care of this officer's family who was slain. And it was almost a 2-page letter of thanksgiving and appreciation. And that's the kind of thing our people do on their own. They voluntarily do it. They didn't call me up to tell me they were doing it. They didn't call me up to ask permission to do it. They just went ahead and did it. And that's the best kind of community service I can think of, where people feel a desire to want to serve the community and an obligation to want to pitch in and help people.
There's so many things we could talk about in the minutes remaining. I just remembered from reading the book that you had a tie-in with what I think is one of the most lovable restaurant chains of all time, and that's the Big Boy franchise.
We bought Bob's Big Boy in California back in 1968 and expanded it and built it up from 27 restaurants to over 150, and finally we sold it, and it turned into a lot of it out there, I guess, into Caro's and Coco's.
Is it difficult, if you do your job right, to maintain food safety? The reason I ask is, I don't know whether you're aware, but out here in Los Angeles, one of the TV stations a couple of weeks ago did a scalding expose on some of the major restaurants in this town. And I won't even tell you here on the air what some of the things they found. But I would think that since you dealt early on in food service, and particularly providing foods for the airlines, that you had to learn quality control pretty quickly.
Well, we have very tough standards on food, and on food handling and on sanitation. And that's, I guess, why I spend so much time in the kitchens. When I visit a hotel, I do spend a lot of time in the kitchens. I go into the refrigerators to see if the food has been properly wrapped and maintained, and if it's dated, so we know when the food was received in the hotel, and so it's not too old. And we provide our people with the very best refrigeration and cooking equipment so the food can be handled properly. We have a whole team of people who just travel all the time on food safety audits and inspections. And sure, every now and then we'll make a mistake and we'll have a problem, but we feed millions and millions of people every year, and our problems are very few. And I think the reason is because we have very tough standards, and we really enforce them, and we really believe it. It's part of our corporate culture is the safety of our guests.
Another brand you had for a while is a real favorite of mine is Roy Rogers, which has gone through a lot of metamorphoses over the years. I have a couple of unused Roy Rogers bags that I want to have Roy Rogers autograph sometime, but he's not too well. I don't think I'm going to make it.
But he's still around out there, so go see him.
I'll tell him you said hello. Bill, in the closing minutes, let's get back to the whole attitudinal thing. When you talk to other CEOs and you meet them, do you try to carry the message to them? Do you say, well, these guys are set in their ways, they're not going to change? I mean, who is your audience?
It depends on who is there. It depends on what they want to hear. If I am speaking to a business group, I always talk about our values, and I talk about the importance of taking care of the employees so they'll take good care of the customers. I had a CEO of a manufacturing firm come to see me 6 months ago, and he said, I really want to know how to give better customer service. And I said, how close are you to your employees? And he gave me kind of a look that, well, I'm not really sure what you mean. And I said, do you get out on the factory floor? Do you get around? Do your people know that you're interested in them personally? Do they know that you care? Do they know that you really are interested in seeing that a great product is produced and that the customers receive the kind of service that you'd like to receive if you were a customer? And those kinds of things. And I said, to me, that's what makes the difference, is that the CEO sends a signal, a strong signal, that he's very interested in the people, that he's out there on the factory floor, making sure that they know that he cares and that he's concerned and that he's in the building.
When you're out doing that, do you think about your dad every so often?
Oh, sure. He was a great role model. He invented management by walking around, as far as I can tell. I was a little kid. I used to go with him to all the hot shops on the weekends when I was out of school and growing up, and I'd go with him because the only time I could see him, because that's where he was. He was out inspecting the units, talking to the people, making sure the standards were right, making sure the waitresses had the right uniforms on and they were starched and they didn't have too much makeup, and making sure the parking lots were hosed down every night and the hamburgers were cooked just right and the hot food was hot and the cold food was cold and the Venetian blinds were clean, and anything you can think of. Boy, he was on top of all the details and ran those places like a military unit, and they produced.
This again will only mean something to people who live in the Washington, D.C. area, but to show you how loyal my Uncle Leo was to hot shops, his wife's father was Evan Scholl's best friend, who ran Scholl's cafeterias in Washington. So he had a dual loyalty there.
Well, Evan Scholl was one of my dad's best friends, and my dad used to tell me that Evan Scholl's kitchen floors were the cleanest in Washington because he never let his employees scrape any crumbs off the counter or any food off the counter onto the floor. They had to put a little can under where they scraped it off or pick it up with their hands and throw it in the trash. So they never scraped anything on the floor, and that's the thing I learned about Evan Scholl.
Yeah, there must be some wonderful, well, some of them are in your book, must be some wonderful stories about the restaurant. I can't think of any other place where you meet people under such friendly circumstances. Of course, sometimes they're rushed and they've got problems and, the air conditioning doesn't work in their room, but for the most part, they're either on vacation, enjoying something, or eating.
Well, that's right. In our hotels, of course, they're working. About 75% of our guests in our hotels are businessmen and businesswomen. And what they tell us is we don't want any problems. We don't want to run the hotel. We don't want to tell you how to run the hotel. We want a hassle-free experience where we can get in, get our work, get out, and go home. And because we want to be back with our families, and we look to you to provide us with a wonderful room, perfect cleanliness, and no hassles.
Well, there's another word you haven't used, but I guess it's implied here, and that is, even though your facilities certainly are not cookie cutter, there has to be a degree of consistency so that the Marriott name means something when people go out there.
Well, consistency is the key to success in any chain operation, whether it's restaurants or hotels or whatever it is. People have to know that the brand stands for a consistently good product. And I think that's what we try to do in Marriott. We try very hard to make sure that our products are consistent. Now, sometimes consistency for a lot of people means boredom. And that's fine with us because we want people to not have to have a problem. We want our customers to really have a good, hassle-free experience.
William Bill Marriott. I'm Dennis Staley.